Lord, have mercy upon us. Lord, have mercy upon us. Our Father, whom art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ, his sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Morning, members.
Confirmation of minutes.
Good morning, members. The minutes of the July 19th sitting have been circulated. Are there any amendments or corrections required? There are none. The minutes stand confirmed as printed.
Messages from the governor.
There are none.
Announcements by the speaker.
Announcements. We've actually been informed that there are members who will be absent today. I believe the member Ben Smith is still traveling with the swimming team, and the MP Pamela Gordon and MP Richards have also indicated they'll be absent today.
Messages from the Senate.
There are none.
Papers and other communications to the House.
There are none.
Petitions.
I believe we have one petition this morning in the name of Minister Ming, MP Ming. MP Ming, would you like to do the petition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that Standing Order 33-8 be suspended to enable me to present the following petition.
Are there any objections to that? None. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I move to leave to introduce the following petition. The petition by Stand Prop Limited requesting that legislation may be enacted to enable the company to discontinue out of Bermuda as set out in the bill entitled Stand Prop Limited Act 2019, the bill. I ask that the said petition be referred to the Joint Select Committee on Private Bills for consideration and report.
Thank you, member.
Statements by ministers.
We have some 9 statements this morning. The first statement this morning is in the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to present your statement?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, the public access to information regime is well known to honorable members and the public. It began with the act passed in 2010, followed by regulations in 2014. Mr. Speaker, today the management of requests made under the act has begun to stretch the administrative capacity of information officers. The result is the mistaken release of information, which is rightly exempt under the act, delays the processing of requests, and information officers so burdened with requests that performance of their core duties suffer. Mr. Speaker, Section 17 of the Patty Regulations 2014 sets out the 12 specific functions of information officers. The duties are considerable and are clearly designed to ensure great care is taken in the management of requests. The demands placed on information officers in some departments have so affected their work that some officers have relinquished the role, while others have complained about the all-consuming nature of the task. It is important to note that both the Act and the regulations contemplate the administrative burden that can be caused and provide criteria by which requests can be refused where they would, and I quote, cause a substantial and unreasonable interference with or disruption of other work of the public authority, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I am advised that this is seldom invoked by information officers or heads of public authorities, as the spirit of the Act, namely to encourage access to information, is honored by the hard-working men and women within the public service. However, Mr. Speaker, I think it important to provide honorable members and the public with an example of what is sometimes required to fulfill PADI requests. The Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health requested assistance from the Policy and Strategy section to respond to PADI Request 341, a request for records related to inspections, complaints, investigations, safety concerns, and accidents involving daycare centers and providers. The Ministry of Health had initially denied access under Section 16(1)(c) of the Act because fulfilling the request would cause substantial and unreasonable interference with or disruption with the work of the ministry. The internal review decision upheld the denial of access for this same reason and denied access for specific components under exemptions of personal information, Section 23(1), commercial information, Section 25(1)(c), and information received in confidence, Section 26(1)(a). The Ministry of Health believed that it had evidence of the volume of time required to garner the relevant documents. However, the Information Commissioner's Office rejected the Ministry of Health's decisions, finding that fully processing the request, and I quote, will not cause a substantial and unreasonable interference or disruption, end quote, of the other work of the ministry. It is important to note that whilst addressing the original request, the information requested was expanded to include an even longer period of time. Mr. Speaker, I can advise honorable members that it took 12 public officers almost 400 hours at a cost of $20,000 to process this request. The almost 400 hours required to fulfill this request did not enable the information officer alone to handle the request within the time frame required, and the associated duties could not be delegated as there was a shortage of staff. It is for this reason that the Ministry of Health sought the assistance of the Policy and Strategy section to facilitate the request. Whether the ministry devoted an individual or multiple resources to administer this process, it would have resulted in substantial interference with and disruption of the work of the ministry. Notably, Mr. Speaker, this was only one request, and until PSS assistance was engaged, the Ministry of Health had to suspend its policy legislative development initiatives as its 3 policy analysts had to be deployed to processing PADI requests. Mr. Speaker, it was the former government that abolished the PADI unit, which had previously provided Secretariat-style suite of services in support of PADI. 4 posts were abolished, and the then Cabinet determined that the Policy and Strategy section of the Cabinet Office would continue to undertake any functions required to be performed under the PADI Act 2010. Mr. Speaker, whilst it is not proposed to re-establish the PADI unit presently, I wish to advise this Honorable House that I have invited the leadership of the public service to examine a means by which to re-engage a level of centralized expertise. This will make the use of training in PADI management received by officers within the PSS and will provide an additional layer of support to the management of requests under the Act. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to mention a disturbing trend with respect to the use of information pursued and received pursuant to requests under the Act. I was not in the legislature when the 2010 Act was passed, but it bears repeating that the purpose of the Act is to give public the right to obtain access to information held by public authorities to the greatest extent possible, subject to the exceptions that are in the public interest for the protection of the rights of others. increase transparency and eliminate unnecessary secrecy with regard to information held by public authorities, increase the accountability of public authorities, inform the public about the activities of public authorities, including the manner in which they make decisions, and to have more information placed in the public domain as a matter of routine. Mr. Speaker, those are honorable goals and speak to a modern democracy's need to better engage the people it serves. However, Mr. Speaker, there is now a clear culture of weaponizing these objectives to serve political ends and other agendas. The result is an increasing atmosphere of undue caution in the provision of advice to ministers and a reluctance to commit to writing or any form of permanent record legitimate, contemporaneous views and thinking around critical policies on behalf of the people of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, this is dangerous. Legitimate scrutiny will encourage accountability, but gotcha journalism or wanton political use of PADI, even by honorable members, will yield a shrinking culture of efficient decision-making. This government is determined to provide a framework for the management of PADI that fully embraces the original intentions of the Act and supports a regime that provides the people of Bermuda with the fullest information about the work done every day in their name and on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. I understand that the second statement is also yours. Would you like to present that at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, now that the leadership process in the United Kingdom has been complete and the new Prime Minister has signaled a clear intention for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union as at the 31st of October, Bermuda, like many other overseas territories, must renew their preparation for these events. This is especially important where there is the growing likelihood of a no-deal Brexit. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I can advise this Honourable House that as a part of Bermuda's ongoing preparation for this scenario, I have determined to strike a post-Brexit working group to consider and address those issues required to prepare Bermuda for the likely post-Brexit scenarios which may obtain in the United Kingdom. For the information of honourable members and the public, consider views on the impact of a no-deal Brexit can be summarized as follows. Trade. The United Kingdom would revert to World Trade Organization rules on trade. While Britain would no longer be bound by EU rules, it would have to face the EU's external tariffs. The price of imported goods in shops for Britons could go up as a result. Some British-made products may be rejected by the EU as new authorization and certification might be required. Manufacturers could move their operations to the EU to avoid delays in components coming across the border. People. The United Kingdom would be free to set its own controls on immigration by EU nationals, and the bloc could do the same for Britons. There could be long delays at borders if passports and customs checks are heightened. Laws. Relevant EU laws will be transferred over so there will be no black holes in Britain's new law book. Britain would no longer have to adhere to the rulings of the European Court of Justice, but it would be bound to the European Court of Human Rights, a non-EU body. Money. The UK government would not have to pay the annual £13 billion £13 billion contribution to the EU budget. However, Britain would lose out on some EU subsidies. The Common Agricultural Policy gives $3 billion to farmers in the United Kingdom. It is likely that both the European Union and the United Kingdom will have to honor financial commitments under the 2019 budget. The Irish border. The issue of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic would remain unresolved. While physical infrastructure has been vetoed, the border will become an external frontier for the European Union in the event of a no-deal Brexit. There would be pressure to enforce customs and immigration controls. However, the UK government has said it would aim to avoid a hard border, and for a temporary period there will be no new tariffs on goods crossing the border from Ireland into Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to advise this Honourable House that HM Treasury has confirmed that Bermuda's EU Solvency II equivalence will be automatically maintained between Bermuda and the United Kingdom after the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union, in either a deal or no deal scenario as part of existing EU legislation that is being moved over into domestic UK law upon Brexit. Mr. Speaker, in anticipation of the eventual Brexit scenario, a draft bill has been prepared by Council and Chambers, and that bill will address any resultant lacunae in Bermuda law. Honourable members can expect to be invited to consider the bill when we return in September. Mr. Speaker, the full impact of Brexit on overseas territories generally, and Bermuda in particular, is difficult to measure, particularly against the background of the competing and unsettled political interests in the United Kingdom. Considerations must include the prospect of a snap general election, the potential for a change in the UK government, and therefore its policy towards the overseas territories. It is therefore proposed to strike a post-Brexit working group to examine these scenarios and prepare Bermuda for eventualities arising out of the post-Brexit UK. Mr. Speaker, I have invited the Honourable Member for Constituency Number 17, the Honourable C. Walton Brown, to chair this working group. Honourable members will recall the key role he played by the Honourable Member in securing visa-free travel for Bermudians in the Schengen countries and his keen insight to issues related to the European Union. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the group is proposed to consist of the following representative members: a Trade Union Congress representative, an opposition representative, a Progressive Labour Party representative, a business community representative, a youth representative, an NGO and third sector representative, and a civil servant who will serve as ex officio and secretary to the working group. Mr. Speaker, as part of its remit, the working group will examine possible responses of Bermuda to any changes in UK relations with overseas territories, including any necessary constitutional change, as well as any necessary changes to the existing regime of self-governance presently enjoyed by Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, this is new territory, not just for Bermuda, but for the world. A European Union without the United Kingdom is something that has often been discussed, but is now on the cusp of becoming reality. This government recognizes the uncertainty this can bring for Bermudians who live in and travel to the United Kingdom and Europe, and for those businesses who operate here and in those jurisdictions. We have been preparing for some time, and our London office team is actively engaged in the work required to ensure we have the best intelligence to support our policymaking. Come what may, Bermuda is well placed to manage the change that Brexit will bring. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. The next statement is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister, would you like to present your statement?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to advise honourable members and the general public on recent developments and proposals under consideration relating to Bermuda's National Pension Scheme. Honourable members will be aware that the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 and related regulations were introduced to provide for the registration, administration, and funding of mandatory occupational pension plans in Bermuda and related matters. This legislation has been amended over the years to better address the needs of the members of pension plans, with the most recent relating to the financial hardship withdrawals in 2010 and 2011. Mr. Speaker, the Pension Commission, as the supervisor and regulator of occupational pension schemes, has undertaken a review of the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 and regulations made thereunder, and has recommended a number of significant enhancements, such as to provide it with more effective regulatory and enforcement powers, introducing regulatory fees and monetary fines for noncompliance, reducing the audit burden on small pension funds, increasing the existing small pension amount that plan members can receive in a lump sum, and to provide the Commission with the power to exempt plans from specific requirements under the Act. The Commission's Advisory Committee, which is made up of a wide range of private sector representatives, has reviewed and discussed the above recommendations and is broadly supportive of the proposed enhancements. Mr. Speaker, the Commission has also recommended further amendments to the Act to provide for more withdrawal freedom for plan members at retirement and extending the scope of financial hardship applications to include funeral expenses, removing the restrictions on persons receiving a pension being able to apply and including off-campus housing as an eligible educational expense. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be aware the government's 2017 election platform stated that it would, I quote, address the current structural imbalance of pension benefits that exist between guest workers and Bermudians by requiring equal treatment for Bermudians and expatriate labor. Currently, employers are not required by law to provide the same level of pension benefits to guest workers as they are to Bermudians, thus making it more expensive to employ Bermudians, close quote. I can report that the Ministry made a request to the Commission to seek industry feedback on this proposal. Accordingly, members of the Commission's Advisory Committee were invited to discuss and provide input on the above proposal. The Standing Committee is comprised of representatives of third-party plan administrators, law firms, union representatives, unions, employers, international companies, and the accounting profession. In addition, representatives of the Association of Bermuda International Companies, Hotel Employers of Bermuda, Restaurant Association, Construction Association of Bermuda, Landscaping Association, Bermuda Human Resources Association, and a former board member of the Human Rights Commission were invited to make representations on the implications of introducing the proposal on their respective industries or areas. Mr. Speaker, the Commission's board considered the Advisory Committee's comments and provided the following comments and recommendations to the Ministry. A, the Commission supports the international labor principle that pensions are good for all employees. B, the current legislation should be amended to require all non-Bermudians satisfying the eligibility requirement to be enrolled in a registered pension plan. C, exemptions should be provided for non-Bermudian work permit holders employed for a short term, that is 2 years and under. However, upon receiving a renewal of their work permit, they would be required to be enrolled. D, non-Bermudians leaving Bermuda permanently should be allowed to receive their accumulated pension balances as is currently in place. E, the current contribution rate, 5% for employers and 5% for employees, should be phased in for non-Bermudians as was the original practice when the legislation was first introduced for Bermudians and their spouses. F, it could be argued that the current exemption is contrary to the Human Rights Act as it appears to discriminate against non-Bermudians based upon their national origin. And G, the Commission recognized that some employers have a competitive advantage and benefit from a lower cost of operations by their employment of non-Bermudians and the savings that result from not having to make the required pension contributions into a pension plan for these types of employees. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry is generally in support of the Commission's comments and recommendations and proposes to amend the Act to give effect to these proposals along with those items mentioned previously. Accordingly, I can confirm that during the next legislative session, a bill containing all of the proposed amendments will be tabled and debated in this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the proposed enhancements will, upon their introduction, represent the most significant legislative change since the Act was first introduced. They are sensible, reflect the needs of the members of pension plans, and are in line with pension provisions and regulations in other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, in closing, as this government continued its time in office, the proposed amendments to the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 represents just another step in our effort to establish a better and fairer Bermuda that was promised in our election platform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, the second statement, would you like to do that as well?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Continue.
Speaker, I'm pleased to advise this Honourable House and the listening public that the OECD's Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, the FHTP, has formally reported its approval of Bermuda's economic substance regime legislative framework, including the most recent amendments exempting entities that are engaged in a relevant activity but resident for tax purposes in another jurisdiction from economic substance requirements. By way of background, Bermuda, the Crown Dependencies, and other British overseas territories have each developed economic substance legislative frameworks that were built upon principles provided by the FHTP, which falls under the OECD's Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Inclusive Framework, as well as those set out in the European Union's Code of Conduct Group scoping paper regarding economic substance requirements. The recent public announcement by the OECD FHTP means that our legal framework is in line with the OECD's standards and that Bermuda is recognized as a non-harmful tax jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of necessity, the Ministry of Finance has now turned its attention to other areas of our legislative framework that require amendment to ensure that our legislative framework is similar to that of other equivalent jurisdictions. Indeed, the EU and the OECD recognize that the economic substance framework must reflect a level playing field across all equivalent jurisdictions. In order to harmonize our legislation with equivalent jurisdictions, Bermuda initiated preliminary discussions with the relevant EU and OECD officials in April, and those engagements are continuing, both at the political and technical levels, to ensure that any proposed amendments are acceptable to both the EU and the OECD. Mr. Speaker, following the assessment of the economic substance framework of all jurisdictions, the Ministry has now been able to do a jurisdictional comparative analysis to ensure, one, that there is no economic disadvantage as a result of jurisdictional arbitrage, and two, any amendment made meets the EU Code of Conduct Group OECD standards. Mr. Speaker, the most significant amendments under consideration are related to holding entities, finance and leasing, shipping, and local companies. The Ministry of Finance has consulted with specific stakeholders to ensure the best possible legislative outcome. The Code of Conduct Group has indicated that it will consider Bermuda's proposed amendments in September, but must receive our submissions, i.e. draft bills together with the explanatory memoranda, by the 26th of August. We will also submit our proposed amendments to the OECD FHTP for consideration by the 26th of August for their review and consideration. Mr. Speaker, another area that requires legislative amendments relates to collective investment vehicles. The BMA has been engaged in discussions with the EU Commission about the proposed legislative framework for CIVs, collective investment vehicles. The CIV framework will also be considered by the Code of Conduct Group in September. Mr. Speaker, the Economic Substance Act allows the Minister of Finance to give guidance on how the Act will be applied. To that end, the Ministry of Finance, through the Registrar of Companies, has adopted a two-phase approach in preparing guidance notes. In the first instance, the guidance notes will be general principles, which were developed and released in draft to industry stakeholders for feedback and comment. We have now begun the second phase, namely the development of industry-specific guidance notes through a comprehensive engagement with sector-specific professionals and experts. Specific guidance notes will be finalized once we have completed level-setting legislative amendments. Finally, Mr. Speaker, honorable members are advised that there are two parts of the OECD assessment of the economic substance regime of the 2.2 jurisdictions, namely the legislative framework and the effectiveness of the monitoring mechanism to ensure compliance with the legislation. As reported in my introductory remarks, Bermuda's economic substance legislative framework was approved by the FHTP in the June legislative assessment. In December, the OECD will assess Bermuda's effectiveness of the monitoring mechanism to ensure compliance with the legislative provisions. This assessment will involve the examination of the registrar's resources and methodology. In order to achieve such effectiveness, the registrar plans to utilize technology as well as additional staff to ensure the successful implementation of the economic substance legislative regime. To that end, the registrar is in the process of developing an e-registry system that will allow him to collect and analyze economic substance information and to enforce economic substance requirements. Mr. Speaker, in advance of the December 2019 fully equipped monitoring mechanism assessment by the FHTP, the registrar has requested additional resources dedicated to compliance monitoring and enforcement. Such requests were approved during the 2019-2020 budget process. The recruitment process is underway, as is the development of the registrar's compliance mechanism for economic substance. The Registrar of Companies plans to leverage and incorporate its experience with performing risk-based corporate compliance monitoring into the mechanism for economic substance compliance. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to personally thank the hard work and dedication of the various government and Bermuda Monetary Authority officers for coordinating and managing the government's responsibilities at home and abroad in relation to this initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister down for statements this morning is that of the Minister Fogo. Minister, would you like to put your statement this morning?
Good morning. Yes, I would, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to you. Good morning to the listening public. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise today to provide to the members of this honorable House with an update on the progress of the modernization of Bermuda's labor laws that I spoke about on July 5, 2019. Mr. Speaker, the tabling today of the Employment, Maternity Leave Extension and Paternity Leave Amendment Act 2019 is the first of a number of proposed changes to the legislation that will be completed this year. This particular bill fulfills the government's platform and throne speech promise to increase maternity leave and to provide for paternity leave for the first time in the legislation. The bill also provides for flexibility in the use of vacation leave. Mr. Speaker, further legislation will be tabled later this year in this honorable House to include the reduction from 10 arbitration assessor tribunals in 4 acts to a single tribunal for all labor and employment matters. This will reduce the administrative costs and streamline the functions of the tribunals. Provision for zero tolerance of violence and harassment in the workplace. In keeping with the ILO adoption of the Violence and Harassment Convention, the amendments will also deal with bullying, harassment, and in particular, sexual harassment in the workplace. Employers will be required to have in place a zero-tolerance policy for harassment in the workplace and recourse for employees for any contravention of the policy. Provision for current statements of employment to remain the same or benefits to increase in line with amended legislation and not change or be altered to the minimum standard as set out in the amended legislation. Provision for probation periods for new employees to be fair and reasonable. Streamlining the provisions relating to mediation. The introduction of a civil penalty regime for certain specific offenses and clear breaches of the legislation. Provision for automatic certification for union representation when specific parameters are met. Provision for confidentiality and protection of workers during application for union certification. Reduction of response time by employers to an application for union certification, and provision for parties to agree terms of reference for disputes prior to reporting the dispute to the Labor Relations Section. Mr. Speaker, other matters still under review and consideration include employment protections for persons who are currently designated as non-employees, including, for example, casual, temporary, part-time workers. Protection for employees who are coerced into working overtime for straight-time wages. Tips and gratuities and who should rightfully receive them. Managing expectations regarding out-of-hours contact for employees. The issue is when an employee, including a public officer, is issued with a work cell phone, the expectation is the employee will be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including vacation, with no break or additional remuneration. Protections for employees who have been promoted, and the status of a union bargaining unit when a sale or merger occurs. Mr. Speaker, as many of these changes have been agreed by social partners, including the unions and employers, we look forward to this House taking a bipartisan approach similar to the Wage Commission bill when we return for the debate following the summer recess. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, the next statement is also in your name. Would you like to do that one as well?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to developing and strengthening the workforce by supporting the educational pursuits and career development of Bermuda's youth. We recognize that providing access to higher learning and meaningful workforce opportunities strategically positions our young people on the path to developing sustainable careers. Therefore, it gives me great pleasure to today share with this Honorable House the 2019 scholarship and award recipients funded by the Department of Workforce Development. Further, I will also highlight the summer employment initiatives coordinated by the department. Mr. Speaker, for many students in pursuit of attaining tertiary education locally or overseas, the goal can be far-reaching. For various reasons, families may experience financial hardship, which becomes a barrier to further education. The traditional student we once knew has changed over the years. Many students work part-time or full-time while attending college. Additionally, with increased college and university tuition costs, textbooks, room and board, and other associated costs, it makes it more difficult for families to be able to afford higher education for their children. This government continues to invest in our young people. We are delivering on our pledge to provide greater opportunities for Bermudians that assist them to meet their educational and training needs. This is further demonstrated by providing financial support to students to help defray the costs of tuition and creates a talent pipeline for Bermuda's workforce. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to present this year's recipients with their awards on Thursday, June 27, at a lunch reception held at the Department of Workforce Development. Recipients shared their future aspirations upon graduation. The selection committee takes great care each year to understand the needs for Bermuda's workforce, utilizing available employment statistics and work permit data. Applications for new awards are received online using the Bermuda Scholarships website, www.bermudascholarships.com. Successful students must demonstrate a minimum grade point average of 2.7 on a scale of 4.0. Returning students must provide proof of enrollment and their official transcript indicating that they will continue their studies. Providing they meet the minimum GPA requirement per semester, continued funding is granted until the completion of their program. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that a total of 35 recipients were awarded scholarships for 2019. All recipients were awarded funding valued up to $10,000 per student annually for the length of their program of study. I am honored to present this year's scholarship recipients, and they are John Bonds, Danica Bean, Mylan Bourne-Otterbridge, Lucas Bridges, Lance Brown Jr., Tabia Butterfield, Mason Cartwright, Caroline Caton, Nia Daly, Jermaine Deers, Andre Durham, Ari Edwards, Amari Abbin, Sharmila Harris, Jelenia Hassel, Naoki Hassel, Shantae Hollis, Shapri Jewell, Cameron Lee Ming, Colleen Martin, Sierra McGee, Teray Morrison, Michaela O'Brien, Phoebe Osborne, Haley Place, Seth Samuels, Kyla Sinclair, Alana Smith, Rosemary Swain, Jeremy Taylor, Tiante Thomas, Shantae Young, Shayla Gift, Dominique Jones, Zaire Wolf Simpson. Mr. Speaker, today funding has also been awarded to 10 students locally at Bermuda College, ranging from $500 to $3,000 per annum. Last year, 58 students received funding locally. This year, that figure is expected to remain fairly stable, with $175,000 budgeted to support local students. However, the final numbers cannot be determined until the end of August when registration closes for Bermuda College, Mr. Speaker. The total cost for overseas funding for this fiscal year to date is up to $350,000 for a total of 35 students, of which 18 are new and 17 are returning students. Mr. Speaker, the department consults with the Ministry of Education to make certain that there is no duplication of scholarship recipients. Verifying this information assists in ensuring that the government's investment in our young people is awarded in a fair and equitable manner. Mr. Speaker, $50,000 is budgeted each year to assist individuals in obtaining their GED diploma. These funds are allocated equally to CARE and to the Adult Education Center. Due to the variation in cost of tuition for each establishment, TAN students are sponsored with CARE and TAN students with the adult education classes. This financial support provides persons a second chance to obtain a GED. We wish all students every success as they further their studies locally or overseas and look forward to their return to Bermuda's workforce. I now move to the Summer Employment Program for college and university students, which assists participants in the development of their career goals by connecting work experience to academic learning. Work assignments are professional in nature and based on entry-level roles within a specific industry. Mr. Speaker, program applicants must demonstrate full-time enrollment in a college or university and possess a minimum of 2.5 or higher. Community involvement, a formal interview, and a personal statement of career goals are required. Interns receive placements within government, private, and nonprofit sectors where they develop leadership, decision-making, time management, and problem-solving skills. In addition, they gain exposure to career and work competency standards within their chosen profession. Monday, 20th of May, marked the commencement of the Summer Employment Program. Over the course of the summer, each intern will complete up to 10 weeks' work experience. For their efforts, they will receive a $5,000 stipend over the 10-week period, or $500 weekly. I've been advised this year that we have a group of extremely talented interns. Some of the academic programs our interns are pursuing are law, social policy, political science, business, health, and all the health-related areas, science, or many of the science-related areas, human services, education, electrical engineering, architecture, advanced automotive technology, television and film, graphic design, music technology, and criminology and criminal justice. Mr. Speaker, this government remains heavily vested in developing Bermuda's youth, as demonstrated by our continued commitment and support of the Summer Employment Program. Although we have found it necessary to reduce budgets and curtail spending, the program this year afforded 87 interns with work experience, and these are the high school students. Further, we partnered with Cabinet Office this year to offer the Enhanced Summer Employment Program. The Enhanced Program offered competitive internship where interns are tasked with significant projects related to policy and strategy in the delivery of government's initiatives. This year, the Enhanced Program provided 4 talented students the opportunity with Cabinet Office. We have learned from our students that there is no shortage of summer employment opportunities. We have been pleased to find that opportunities in the private sector has grown. Returning college students are often faced with multiple offers for summer employment, and that this is coming from the students. There is also an increased trend in students remaining abroad for summer months to continue their academic studies or participate in overseas internship. Mr. Speaker, the benefits of work experience, opportunities, and participation in the Summer Employment Program extend well beyond the summer to influence career development over the long term. Several former program participants over the years have secured full-time employment with the employers with which they were placed while participating in the program. Going forward, we intend to put a process in place to better track employment outcomes resulting from the summer programs. Mr. Speaker, others reveal the Summer Employment Program as an excellent opportunity to build experience in their respective areas of study. Many also find the exposure to real-world work experiences solidifies their chosen career path. They endeavor further to pursue graduate degrees. In addition, several students use the program for college credit towards fulfillment of their coursework. With the closure of the Department of Community Education and transfer of staff to the Department of Workforce, this year the department assumed the responsibility of coordinating the summer internship for high school students. The program is 4 weeks in duration and provides the participants with an opportunity to work shadow professionals in their chosen area of interest. As a result, they are better equipped to make more informed choices about their future studies and career path. And as I mentioned earlier, this year there are a total of 87 participants. This year's participants attend the senior, private, and home schools throughout the island, as well as overseas boarding schools. Before I close, I must extend my thanks to those who have helped make those initiatives a success. Special thanks, of course, to the individuals at the Department of Workforce Development for continuing to go above and beyond to help young Bermudians. My final comments today are directed to our employers as well as to our participating interns. To our business partners, I want to offer my sincere thanks to all of you for opening up your establishments to our young people. Without your support, the programs would not be successful. Our youth truly benefit from your guidance and generosity. Thank you to the many government departments and Krangers providing the opportunity for our young people. Lastly, thank you to the private sector and nonprofit companies who participated in the Summer Employment Program and Summer Internship Program. To our award recipients and young people participating this year in the summer programs, you are Bermuda's future. We will continue to help in any way we can, equipping you to successfully make your way in what is becoming an increasingly competitive workforce. I wish you success in your work experience and upcoming studies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Birch, would you like to do your statement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased first to report on the Department of Land Valuation's bursary student, Ms. Andisha Busby, who has successfully completed her 3-year Bachelor of Science Real Estate degree program at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, this summer she has also completed 7 weeks of work experience with the Department of Land Valuation and recently attended her graduation ceremony in the UK. We are currently awaiting confirmation from the UK Valuation Office on the placement location for the 2-year secondment that Ms. Busby will undertake as a graduate student. It is anticipated that she will commence her work experience in the UK in September 2019. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the Director of the Department of Land Valuation, Ms. Diane Elliott, both of whom are in the gallery this morning, for her unwavering support of the bursary student and her efforts in securing her a secondment in the UK. Mr. Speaker, I also reported in October last year on the progress being made in filling critical vacant posts in the engineering section in the Ministry of Public Works. I rise today to give a further report on additional progress in this area, as well as highlight summer student support this year. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Remy Sabir, a former trainee and graduate of Western New England College, now University, following a secondment to Associated Engineering in Edmonton, Canada, returned to a full-time post in 2009 as an electrical engineer and was promoted to principal electrical engineer in September 2017. Mr. Speaker, since that time, he's been instrumental and unrelenting in pursuing the recruitment of staff for the electrical section. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Martin Biffin joined the department as the mechanical engineer in July 2011.
Yes, Minister, continue on.
Well, your people were louder than me, Mr. Speaker, so I thought I'd wait.
Continue on.
I'll start over from that one then, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Martin Biffin joined the department as the mechanical engineer in July 2011. He briefly assumed the role of principal electrical engineer in January 2015 before moving to principal mechanical engineer in August that year. In that position, he is responsible for all fleet vehicles maintained and operated from the Quarry Depot. He will be retiring at the end of this month and returning to his native Wales. It is expected that he will be succeeded by a Bermudian. Mr. Speaker, Attila Fustos joined the ministry over a year ago as a principal structural engineer. He is responsible for the government-owned heavy civil structures on the island. He states, "It has been a challenging and exciting experience working for the Bermuda government, and I'm fortunate to be part of such a motivated Bermudian team. I look forward to continuing to encourage the future generation of engineers on the island." Mr. Speaker, Tarek Christopher, chemical engineer, began his career in 2001 as a trainee operations engineer for water and sewage. Having completed a year's secondment with the Infrastructure Planning Division of KMK Consulting in Brampton, Ontario, he returned to the department. A former Bermuda government bursary student with an associate degree in political science from the Bermuda College, he graduated from Dalhousie University with a Bachelor's of Engineering degree in chemical engineering, and he currently serves as the principal engineer, water and sewage. Mr. Speaker, Tina Biercero, a Bermudian who holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering with a minor in structures. She joined the ministry in September 2009 as assistant highways engineer, followed by a year's secondment with Associated Engineering in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, to obtain her professional designation. She left the ministry in October 2015 to join Public Works in Sedona, Arizona, and returned as consultant engineer in July 2016, and then was hired as civil engineer highways in August 2018. She is currently the acting principal highways engineer. Mr. Speaker, Carmen Trott will be known to you as the lead engineer on the recently completed Kings Wharf project. She has served as a trainee civil engineer, assistant civil engineer in 2005, and then civil engineer structures in 2010. In 2013, the ministry sent Carmen on a one-year secondment to Mott MacDonald in the UK, working in their maritime and bridge design teams. In 2015, she took a position in the private sector where she is currently employed. The ministry hired that firm under a structural services support contract in 2016, and she returned to the ministry as a full-time in-house consultant in January 2018, working on the Artemis building relocation, Kings Wharf, and bridges projects. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Daniele Bortoli rejoined the ministry last year after an almost 3-year hiatus, working for one of the leading design engineering firms in Manchester, BDP Limited. There, Daniele was employed as an electrical design engineer, working predominantly on new hospital projects and university campus developments. He holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of Leicester and a Master of Science degree in Sustainable Electrical Building Services from Manchester University. He has extensive international experience, having worked with some of the best engineering consultancies in North America and Europe. With experience in the industrial, commercial, residential, and healthcare sectors, Daniele brings a unique skill set and a deep practical know-how to his post, having started his career as an electrician. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Austin Kenny first worked for the ministry as a trainee engineer in 2010-11. He left to gain experience overseas, working in Canada and Australia on maritime, oil, and gas projects. He completed his undergraduate degree in civil engineering structures in 2010 and Master of Engineering Structures degree in 2013. He returned to Bermuda and the Ministry of Public Works in late 2018 as a senior structural engineer. Mr. Speaker, Carolina Drew has been with the ministry since May 2008 as the highways design engineer. During this time, she has been involved in several road designs and widening projects such as Pender Road Sands, bridges, walls, and roundabout designs such as Blue Hill and Blackwatch Pass roundabouts, and is now working on a new alignment of the St. David's roundabout in preparation for the new swing bridge. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Curtis Childs is a registered engineer in Arizona and has a civil engineering degree from North Arizona University. He was a trainee in 1979 and began employment in 1986. He is currently the construction and maintenance engineer for the highway section. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Ricardo Graham Ward has been a trainee structural engineer since 2015, having started with the department as a summer student in 2010. He holds both bachelor and master degrees in civil engineering. He has completed a secondment in Toronto, Canada, and recently returned from a year-long attachment with the New Bridge Consultants, Ramboll, in the UK. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Zico Johnston joined the ministry in April last year. After achieving his associate's degree, he transferred to Florida International University, where he studied mechanical engineering. In 2017, he graduated cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering. During the last 6 months, Zico completed a secondment in Canada, where he worked with H.H. Angus, designing and drafting heating and cooling systems for numerous commercial buildings. He also learned cutting-edge technology in 3D modeling of buildings and structures, which he has already trialed on King's Wharf since returning home. Zico is currently working towards his professional engineering license and registration with the Professional Engineers of Ontario. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Jamar Deal started in the ministry in May 2018. He has a bachelor's degree with honors in electrical power engineering and a master's degree in maintenance management with an emphasis on reliability. He, too, has recently completed a 6-month internship in Toronto at Mulvey and Bonini, where he worked on large, complex projects, gaining valuable international work experience. He's also currently working towards his professional engineering license and registration with the Professional Engineers of Ontario. Mr. Speaker, Bermudian Tabia Butterfield has been working with the department since December 2016. She first came to the ministry as a summer student working in the Highways and Structures section. After a short placement during Christmas 2016, Tabia returned to Seneca College, where she completed her civil engineering technician diploma in June 2017. That summer, she designed and managed the building of a bus shelter and curb realignment on Palmetto Road. She was also awarded a Works in Engineering government bursary to pursue a 4-year Master's of Engineering degree at Cardiff University. She returned to the ministry during the summer of 2018 and has been involved with the Bridges and King's Wharf projects. Mr. Speaker, Jerome Daniels graduated from Florida International University in May last year with a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, power systems, and network communications. He joined the ministry at the beginning of 2019 as an electrical engineering energy consultant. Jerome is currently identifying ways to reduce government's energy consumption, beginning with primary and middle schools. He has already completed surveys at several schools and identified significant cost-saving measures. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the 4 summer students we have in the engineering section. The dean of those students, Mr. Speaker, is Lance Brown, who is returning for his 3rd summer with us, an electrical engineering student currently attending Aston University. The program involves him in various projects around the island and includes many aspects of the electrical engineer's professional life. Cody Simons, Mr. Speaker, returns for a 2nd year, working alongside the electrical engineers, gaining valuable insight, knowledge, and experience, not only as to what an engineer does, but how they approach a problem from different perspectives. Mr. Speaker, Cody is currently studying mechanical engineering at the University of New Brunswick. Mr. Speaker, Alex Doyling first started the Public Works Engineering program in 2018 as a work placement student as one of the requirements of his high school. That summer, he began with the structural engineers. After his first year of university this year, he returns and rejoined the structural engineers. Currently, he is studying computer engineering at Kutztown University in the United States. And finally, Mr. Speaker, Jair Lawrence Salam, he is the newest and at 17 years of age, the youngest summer student in the structural engineering section. During his short time at the ministry, he has been exposed to a number of new concepts and technologies, including working with the chief engineer to construct a tender document on the online application orbiter for the upcoming PGA tournament. He has been exposed to AutoCAD and 3D and other assignments to help him become more proficient with this program. Mr. Speaker, Kirk Otterbridge currently serves in a dual role of plant manager at Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility and assistant chief engineer. Kirk is a former trainee and operations engineer who has managed the Tynes Bay facility since 2007. He championed the power engineering training program at Tynes Bay, introduced the solid waste contingency system for the island, and acted as earnest representative for the major plant refurbishment, including the installation of a new turbine generator. As assistant chief engineer for the last 3 years, he has not only shadowed the chief, but assumed responsibility for and overseen the operations section, assisted with the day-to-day running of the department, learned all aspects of the department in preparation to assume the chief engineer's post next month. Mr. Speaker, these are just a few of the outstanding Bermudians doing amazing work in the Ministry of Public Works and the wider community. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that you and colleagues will agree this is an outstanding array of young professionals, the majority of whom are Bermudian. Many of them have joined us in the gallery today, so that they will know.
It's been noted.
We are all proud. We are all very proud of their accomplishments thus far, and to serve as encouragement to them that we will assist them in reaching their full potential. Mr. Speaker, there are many people who are responsible for the progress we have made in the engineering department over the last 3 years, but none more worthy of thanks and appreciation than the current chief engineer, Mr. Yves Lorty. Since joining the ministry just under 3 years ago, our chief engineer, better known to all as simply Bob, has set the example for what a guest worker and expert in his field should be all about. Mr. Speaker, for years, private firms, the government, and in particular the Ministry of Public Works has employed guest workers with the proviso that they prepare locals to fill their posts upon departure, or at the very least set them on a career path that would eventually position them towards the more senior positions. In this regard, Bob has single-handedly filled nearly every cubicle in the engineering section with young Bermudian professionals in the fields of civil, structural, electrical, mechanical, power, and highways engineers. From his first day on the job, his primary mission was to identify a replacement for himself. Within months, he did so in the person of Kirk Otterbridge, and promptly set about designing the steps needed to ensure he was ready to take the job before the end of his contract. And as you heard earlier, Kirk is ready and will assume the post. I would pause here to invite my honourable colleagues to look into the gallery at those young men and women. They are the testament to the impact Bob has made on this island. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, I am amazed at where he finds the talent on this little island, as from time to time I have walked through the engineering section only to see a new face and learn that Bob has added yet another team member. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that he has a built-in radar that allows him to track down persons who are engineers or that aspire to be. Not only is Bob able to identify talent, but he nurtures his talent in ways I have never seen before. He is also a very humble man and would much prefer to remain behind the scenes and let the young talent receive the accolades for the work they do. So he won't be too happy with this part of my statement. Mr. Speaker, one such example is with the King's Wharf project in Dockyard, where Bob worked alongside 3 young engineers, Ms. Carmen Trott, Mr. Austin Kenny, and Ms. Tabia Butterfield, which you will recall from a previous ministerial statement were the lead persons on that project that set the gold standard for projects in this ministry. This team ensured that the King's Wharf dock was ready for the first cruise ship of the season. Mr. Speaker, I recall leading up to the first cruise ship's arrival, the team was working around the clock, and here comes Bob on his motorcycle that was completely weighed down. When he stopped, the bike almost toppled over. To my surprise, Bob had converted the basket on his motorcycle into a cooler and brought everyone cool water and juices. And on the floorboard of this same bike, he provided a variety of snacks. Mr. Speaker, not only does Bob look out for staff by willingly passing on his knowledge and expertise, I have witnessed where he has offered some of his own funds to ensure a student could remain in an engineering program. I know he wouldn't want me to mention this either, but I have to give credit where it is due. More recently, Bob worked at 2 top engineering firms in his home country of Canada to secure those secondments I mentioned earlier for our 2 engineers, Zico Johnson and Jamar Deal, who worked for 6 months, gaining valuable experience and credit towards their engineering designations. Mr. Speaker, all of this is done with a unique sense of humor, often added to by the fact that English is not his first language. He views life from a pragmatic position. He is serious in his work, but have as much fun as possible along the way. Notwithstanding all that, Mr. Speaker, all good things must come to an end. Sadly, Bob will be leaving us in a few weeks to return to his native Canada at the conclusion of his contract. However, although he will no longer be on island, resident on island, our relationship with him will not end. Mr. Speaker, such is the quality of this man that he remains committed to helping our team of engineers even after his departure. That, in my view, is a true testament to the quality of the man. Mr. Speaker, you talk to the wife. Mr. Speaker, I know I speak for the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Works, Randy Rochester, and the entire team when I say we will be talking about Bob and his impact on Bermuda for decades to come. And I express my sincerest thanks to him for all the good work he has done while here and the many fun times we have had together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to do something that's not customary and unusual. Being you've named so many of the young people in our gallery is filled with them, I'm going to ask them to stand so they can be fully acknowledged before they depart here. So if they don't mind standing in this moment. And I've done that so that you understand that this House is encouraging you in your endeavors, and we look forward to a long service and in your endeavors to improve life here in Bermuda from the engineering perspective. Congratulations to each of you as you continue. Before I move on and call on the next minister to present his statements, I'd just like to acknowledge inside our chamber this morning, we have a visiting delegation from the Ghana ambassador. It's a Ghana ambassador to the United Kingdom and Israel and his accompanying team. It's Ambassador, I'm going to do my best to get it right now, Papa Uzwana Nkumo. Thank you. And I think Dr. Taibatre is with him as a guest. We'd like to welcome you to our chambers this morning and trust that you have enjoyed what you've seen thus far. And in a moment, I will break and go in the back and just officially have you come in and sign our guest book. Minister Keynes, would you like to do your statement?
If it pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, in anticipation of our annual Cup Match holiday, I rise this morning to provide this Honourable House with an update on the Bermuda Police Service's policing performance and holiday safety and policing plans. Mr. Speaker, whilst the Bermuda Police Service are finalising crime statistics across Bermuda for the last 12 months, its initial analysis suggests that the prevalence of crime and antisocial behaviour is being discouraged through community policing model now in place. Serious violence has been on the decline with no homicides or serious injuries as a result of firearms during the 2019 calendar year. Mr. Speaker, some of the success can be rightfully attributed to the Ministry of National Security's Gang Violence Reduction Team and the Bermuda Police Services for preventing tension between gang members and diverting young men into rehabilitation, notably the Redemption Farm program. The Bermuda Police Service has recorded an uptick in crimes in relation to the theft of motorcycles. Owners are reprimanded and owners are reminded to adequately secure their cycles and their vehicles. The problem is being addressed through a crime prevention and targeting of the key individuals. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Police Service investment in the creation of a dedicated vulnerable persons and child exploitation team is now identifying many aspects of this hidden harm. This has led to a rise in the reporting of crimes relating to vulnerable victims, particularly domestic violence, sexual offences, and online child pornography. Victims who previously would have suffered in silence now feel protected from further harm by the dedicated Bermuda Police Service team. Mr. Speaker, honourable members recall the Bermuda Police Service's extensive recruitment drive in early spring of this year. In total, 110 applications have been received. After initial assessments and candidate profiles, the selection pool has been reduced to 45 applicants. These applicants are currently being processed through medical and psychometric testing, and indications that the cohort of 15 officers will commence on the 6th of October as probationary constables. Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn our attention now to the annual Cup Match Classic between the Somerset Cricket Club and the St. George's Cricket Club. This year's event will take place at Wellington's Oval in St. George's on Thursday, the 1st of August and the 2nd of August 2019. The match will commence each day at 10 a.m. and is scheduled to end at approximately 7:30 p.m. The St. George's Cricket Club has engaged the services of a private security firm, SAS Protection Services, to provide security service at the venue for the duration of the event. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Police Service has appointed a goal commander, Superintendent Naima Aswood, and a civil commander, Inspector Kenton Trott, for the event. These commanders have conducted regular meetings with partner agencies and relative service providers to coordinate safety and contingency plans. A comprehensive operational order has been written in addition to emergency planning procedures to ensure that there is sufficient capability to deal with any eventuality presented. Mr. Speaker, the operational activity at Cup Match grounds and in the surrounding area will be from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. each day. Prior to the admission of the public, safety inspections and searches for prohibited or dangerous items will take place by trained officers and canine units. On the first day of Cup Match, at the St. George's Cricket Club, it will close its bars and grounds to the general public at 10 p.m. There are no plans by the St. George's Cricket Club to have any post-game entertainment. However, the Bermuda Police Services has resources in place to monitor and respond to incidents after the scheduled after-parties. Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner of Police and Commanding Officer of the Royal Bermuda Regiment have actioned formal plans to unify the Bermuda Police Service and the Royal Bermuda Regiment marine assets to advance Bermuda's maritime capabilities. This will enable a larger presence on the water and technical capability to respond to marine incidences, including emergency rescue, crime, and antisocial behavior. Mr. Speaker, the unification of the Bermuda Police Service and the Royal Bermuda Regiment resources is an excellent opportunity for the two agencies to develop their joint marine presence as the Royal Bermuda Regiment continues to develop its Coast Guard element. The unification of the Bermuda Police Service and the Royal Bermuda Regiment will expand the already established parish constable program. Marine parish constables will utilize jet skis. They will be equipped with a blue light, a siren, a loud hailer equipment to provide a daily visible presence on the water to engage with Bermuda's maritime community in support of the crime prevention service provision. The jet ski capability will also provide greater access to the rescue capabilities within hard places to reach within our territorial waters. Mr. Speaker, the public is advised to exercise extreme caution when traveling on Bermuda's roads during the long holiday weekend. Roadside sobriety checks have been now in place for 10 months, and the roadside sobriety checks will continue throughout the summer. The community has largely supported the roadside sobriety checkpoints. The media and licensed premises are each doing their part to help change attitudes and behaviors that risk and dangers of drunk driving. There have, Mr. Speaker, so far over the last 10 months, there have been 366 offenses for impaired driving recorded since the roadside sobriety checks have begun. However, there is an indication that the levels of offending is decreasing, as is evidenced by the reduced number of road traffic casualties reported at the King Edward Memorial Hospital. Mr. Speaker, Cup Match is an exciting time of year. It is a time in our island where we come together to celebrate the abolition of slavery, to celebrate the victories past and present, and to plan our future collective triumphs. Let us all continue to do what we can to ensure that our roads are safe and our waters are safe, and that there are no injuries or fatalities over this festive weekend period. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Would you like to proceed with your second statement?
If it pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Continue on.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I would like to update this Honourable House on the work performed by the Disaster Risk and Reduction and Mitigation Team within the Ministry of National Security. Honourable members recall that the team was created to develop and strengthen Bermuda's disaster contingency plans and codify the roles and responsibilities of the Emergency Measures Organization. Mr. Speaker, for short, the DERM team continues its cruise ship contingency planning. During the 2018 cruise ship season, the DERM team engaged the cruise ships. The DERM team continues its contingency planning, and during the 2018 season, they engaged the cruise ships and stakeholder agencies for a tabletop live exercise. The lessons learned from those exercises were used for the development of a comprehensive report that was shared with the relevant stakeholders. The exercises and after-action report have assisted with drafting the contingency plans to respond to any major incident or mass rescue which could occur on a cruise ship that is visiting or passing through Bermuda. Not only is this critical for the safety and security of the cruise ship passengers and staff, but if an incident should occur, it is beneficial in safeguarding the reputation of our country. Mr. Speaker, during the cruise ship season 2019, all cruise callers to Bermudas have been provided with a document highlighting the key evacuation and assembly points at the dockyard area. The document has been welcomed by the cruise ships, as there were no evacuation and assembly points identified prior to this season. The document gives approximate walking distances and maximum capacities for each location. The 4 teams on board each ship have been given a familiarization walkabout, tour, and key evacuation assembly areas. In case of emergency, the cruise ship 4 teams will be sent to the respective areas to greet and provide accountability for the ship's passengers and crew. The document also contains important contact details and other pertinent information. Honourable members and the public are advised that there are 2 additional cruise ship emergency exercises planned for this season that will further enhance the cruise ship contingency planning. Mr. Speaker, the DERM team continues to advance contingency planning with a focus on developing a hazard, emergency, and evacuation plan for the Ferry Reach area, including our 2 prisons in the area. Honourable members will be aware that there is only one access road in and out of Ferry Reach. The purpose of the plan is to determine an alternative option to and procedures for safe, controlled evacuation of the Ferry Reach community should an event occur that presents a severe risk to life, health, and safety of our community. Mr. Speaker, the Durham team have analyzed census data, conducted site visits, consulted key stakeholders, and have sought technical advice from the Department of Marines and Ports to determine a way forward. A group has been formed comprising of the Durham team, Sol Petrum, Rubus Energy, and the Ferry Reach neighborhood representative to collaboratively develop an evacuation plan. I am pleased to report that the drafting of the plan has commenced, with the first draft distributed to the working group on July 12, 2019. The goal is to have the plan completed by December 1st, 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Durham team have been working closely with Government House, government departments, and private entities in updating contingency plans for our national infrastructure. The planning includes facilitating tours to familiarize responders with the ground, the layout, industry terminologies, mapping updates, and partnerships with our stakeholders. One such engagement will be with Belco in September to coincide with their Environmental Week. Mr. Speaker, regional tsunami exercises held in March presented an opportunity for the Durham team to be involved with finding viable ways to alert the public pending national emergencies. These efforts are in conjunction with the Department of Communications, which launched a tree fault notification app earlier this year. The Bermuda Service and Maritime Operations and other EMO agencies, as well as the private sector. A Durham team member sits on the steering committee of the new government radio initiative, which will allow interagency operability. As technology advances, the Durham team and the government as a whole will continue to introduce modern means of communication to keeping the public updated of emergency situations. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the government was approached by the United States, who was interested in holding a counterterrorism exercise in Bermuda. Whilst the likelihood of such an incident occurring in Bermuda is low, we should nevertheless have contingency plans in place. Planning has been underway, and the Durham team, in conjunction with other agencies for the exercise, that is called Vital Archer, will be held in Bermuda in April of 2020 at the L.F. Wade International Airport. In preparation for the live exercise, a tabletop exercise was attended by 19 departments and agencies, and it was held in June at War Camp. It was successful in identifying Bermuda's multi-agency roles, responsibilities, and limitations, including what is inspected by the Americans. Mr. Speaker, the existing government cybersecurity manager has been transferred to the Durham team, and he's responsible for developing a number of strategies, policies, and guidelines for securing the management of the government's information systems. Representatives from the Ministry of National Security participated in the regional conference on policies and strategies on cybercrime for the Caribbean community, which was held in the Dominican Republic from June 12th to June 14th. The conference focused on international cooperation and establishing good practices to combat cybercrime at national and international levels. As a part of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the Cybersecurity Governance Board is reviewing the Bermuda cybercrime legislation to ensure that it is aligned with international standards. Mr. Speaker, forming part of the Durham team is the National Events Planning Coordinator. This team member is engaged with the organizers of large public events in Bermuda to ensure that they are safely organized in a professional manner, and they are also professional in their approach. Active planning is underway for the safety and security of upcoming events, including our annual Cup Match Classic, the PGA Golf events, and the Carifta Games in 2020. The National Events Coordinator works alongside the Liquor Licensing Authority and the Bermuda Police Service, as well as other stakeholders. He works to ensure that these events are properly organized to decrease the risk of a major incident occurring that could lead to injuries or jeopardize Bermuda's reputation. Mr. Speaker, each year Bermuda diligently prepares for hurricane season. This year, the Durham team member visited the British Virgin Islands in late March for a workshop on the lessons learned from Hurricanes Irma and Maria. This workshop was sponsored by the British Red Cross, and members from the Bermuda's Red Cross were in attendance. Following the workshop, the Durham team advanced talks between the Bermuda Red Cross and other government departments who were involved with Bermuda's most vulnerable population to ensure this segment of our population will be adequately prepared and protected in the time of an emergency situation. Mr. Speaker, our Hurricane Preparedness Week is the first week in June, with the EMO having its first hurricane meeting on June 5th. The next hurricane predictions will be released in early August. Statistically, Bermuda has experienced the most destructive hurricanes in September and in October, so it is important that we remain vigilant and that we remain prepared. Mr. Speaker, the emergency broadcast facility, which broadcasts on 100.1 FM, goes live before, during, and after a hurricane until normal media communications resumes. This radio station has been tested, and it is indeed working. This facility is being upgraded in the next 12 months to transition from an analog signal to a digital signal. Mr. Speaker, the work of the Durham team is important in ensuring that Bermuda is prepared for any large-scale natural emergency or a man-made disaster. I am confident that through their contingency planning, our island home will be well equipped to confront any emergency situation that arises. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I'm going to add a little clarity here. There seems to be a little confusion. The title of the statement that was just read, should have been changed on the order paper. And the order paper reads as addressing the COPMED's policy. You can see it. And I understand that that statement was combined into the earlier statement. For clarity, that's my question to you. It was combined in the earlier statement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. So we weren't made aware of that on the order paper. So what's on the order paper doesn't match the title of what you just read. So we just want the clarity for members who want to ask questions to you that we'll be correct in assuming that questions related to what's the second statement is actually combined in the first statement on the order paper, and the statement that you just read is a separate one in relationship to either of those two.
I offer my humble apologies. It was indeed an administrative error, Mr. Speaker, and I thought that it had been rectified. Again, I offer my humble apologies to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the administrative staff. You're correct, sir. The statement was the Bermuda Police. The first statement was the Bermuda Police summer update, and the second statement, Mr. Speaker, was indeed an update on the disaster risk mitigation team summer update. And again, I ask for your forgiveness and your indulgence, Mr. Speaker.
I had an option of sitting you down and stopping you from doing it, but I figured I'll allow you to do it and we'll clarify it this way.
I'm humbled and I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker.
All right. So members are clear? Thank you. That brings us to a close of the statements for this morning. Reports?
Okay. Reports of committees?
There are none.
Question period.
Question period. The first questions this morning are actually written questions that were deferred from the last sitting. And the first question we're going to take as a written question this morning is a written question from the Deputy Speaker. And the Deputy Speaker to Minister Keynes. Deputy, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Honourable Minister please inform this Honourable House what is the total cost of legal fees in Bermuda and overseas and the names of the local and overseas law firms involved in this ongoing investigation?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the funds for the total man-hours and costs to Bermuda and overseas for the police investigations are $4,688,184.10, Mr. Speaker. The total for airline transportation, airline and ground transportation, Mr. Speaker, are $64,345.70. Mr. Speaker, the total cost for overseas, for accommodation in Bermuda and overseas is $80,900. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Well, I just want some clarity. I asked what was I don't think the minister understood. I asked for the total cost of legal fees in Bermuda and overseas and the names of the local and overseas law firms involved in this ongoing investigation. I'd like to have the names of the law firms. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, with reference to the police investigation, the amount of money that was spent was $862,220.74.
But still, just to help out, I believe the question had two parts. One was cost and one was the names. And I think the deputy is still trying to get clarity on the names of the firms.
Mr. Speaker, the name of the law firm in the investigation is Marshall, Deal, and Meyer, sir.
That's local?
That is the local firm, Mr.
And is there an overseas firm?
Mr. Speaker, there is an investigation with reference. There is an investigation with reference to another part of the investigation with reference to the figures from the Attorney General, and the costs are $1,102,784.49, and the and the law firm is the Cooley Law Firm in Boston, sir. There are fees for legal advice, and it was a legal counsel to the Attorney General, and the legal consultant was named.
That's question two.
Oh, sorry.
That's question two. Deputy, are you good with? Or you want to ask supplementary?
Yes, I'd like to ask a supplementary.
Go ahead.
Minister, could the AG's chambers could have done that work instead of hiring and paying over $800,000 to an outside firm?
I cannot speak to that, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Supplementary. I saw a couple of members that jumped. You had a supplementary? No? Supplementary? Opposition Leader, we'll take you first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question. Would the Honourable States here, would the Honourable Minister please inform this Honourable House what is the total cost of legal fees? Why was this question not addressed to the AG chambers as opposed to the Honourable Minister Keynes?
I cannot speak to why the question came to me. I answered the question as required under the standing orders, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Yes, the question speaks to the ongoing investigation. Can the minister provide clarity as to what investigation we're talking about here?
Minister.
There's an ongoing police investigation, and I think that's the high water mark. There's an ongoing police investigation with reference to a former leader of this country and the surrounding persons. I think that everyone understands the nature of this investigation and why I'm being very measured with my answers, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary to the Honourable Minister. How long has this investigation been going on?
The investigation into this has, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We are talking about the investigation into Dr. Ewart Brown. This investigation has been going on for 7 years. The numbers that we have seen is a culmination of the 7-year investigation. We have broken down these numbers, we've broken down this investigation, so we're clear for all future questions to 2 parts. The first part was dealing with the investigation into Dr. Brown. There was an element of this that was dealing with the investigation into the Leahy portion. As we know, it had 2 phases. The first number that I gave to this Honorable House was with reference to Dr. Brown's investigation. The second part of the investigation is to the investigation of Leahy.
Which is actually part of question 2.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Supplementary?
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. What is the yearly budget for investigations within the Bermuda Police Service?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the yearly budget, but if you look this and break this down mathematically, this investigation we are talking about over the years, mathematically, that is approximately $493,000 a year for this investigation. As we know, there are a number of investigations going on in Bermuda. The total cost, if you look, we've just amassed over $5 million for this particular investigation.
Thank you. Deputy, MP Scott, would you like to put a supplementary?
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister of National Security agree with me that the sum of $80,000, just as one example, could well have been used to fund
80,000 and 800,000.
800,000,
yes.
If that is the correct figure. I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. Could well have been used to fund
Okay. We're in on our grounds then. It's not on our grounds. Okay. Continue on, member.
Just to get the... I'm great. Will the minister...
Yeah.
I'm asking, does the Minister of National Security agree with me that the sum so far expended of some $800,000 could well have been used to assist a colleague minister, the Minister of Public Works, in the annual campaign to help refurbish all of our public schools? Does he agree with me that that would have been a more beneficial use of that money?
Minister, would you like to respond?
Yes.
Deputy, would you like to move on to your second question? Yes.
Mr. Speaker, would the Honourable Minister please inform this Honourable House what is the total cost of fees for the former consultant of the former Attorney General and the cost of legal fees and other costs associated with the Leahy Clinic lawsuit pertaining to this ongoing investigation of Dr.
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable House, the total legal fees for Cooley Law Firm in Boston for the Leahy investigations are $1,182,784.49. Mr. Speaker, total fees paid to Mr. Richard Ambrosio, legal consultant to the Attorney General Trevor Moniz, is $836,050, Mr. Speaker. Just over $300,000, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Deputies, supplementary?
Yes. Was Mr. Ambrosio, was he hired just to work on this case?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak to why he was hired. I know that he was a consultant working in the Attorney General's chambers, hired by the former Attorney General, Mr. Trevor Moniz, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further supplementary?
Yes. Mr. Honourable Minister, were any other staff members in the AG's chambers employed to work on this case?
Yes, sir.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary? Yes.
Will the minister acknowledge that perhaps the consultant worked on other cases, not this one, so that 301 is not totally associated with this particular case?
Minister?
A consultant hired specifically by a minister should not be working on any cases, much as on these types of cases, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister inform this Honourable House how much money has been spent on cold murder cases, over 20 cold murder cases that are ongoing?
I didn't think that was part of this. I didn't think that specifically was part of the question. If you want to go into that may be opening up a new can of worms. You could ask him in general how much money has been spent on other cases, but rather than go into something specific, it wasn't part of the question. So if you want to rephrase it, you can rephrase it. Okay. Any more supplementaries?
I'd like to know how long Mr. Ambrosio was hired as a consultant.
Minister? She's just asking the length of time that he was there.
I'm not sure of the length of time. I was asked to give the cost with reference. We definitely know it ended on July 17th, 2017, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary? Take your supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask for the Minister to advise this House what is the total amount of funding directed to this investigation of which he's now giving answers this morning?
Mr. Speaker, the total fees are $6,096,437.03, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Second supplementary.
Second supplementary. Does the Minister of National Security agree with me that this level of money should now cease and no further funding should be applied to this matter?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I do believe this matter. We believe in that the Constitution is clear, Section 6.1 of the Constitution, that any member of this society has the opportunity for a quick and speedy trial. This matter, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of National Security for this country, we have the opportunity to see the cost of the taxpayer. It is now an opportunity for us to put this case to the bar or allow this matter to take a natural course and go another direction. But it is time, after $6 million, for us, for whomever's in charge of that part of the investigation, to bring it to head, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. No further supplementaries? Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which is also a written question. And it's Minister to you again from the member MP Dunkley. MP, would you like to put your question? And Deputy, would you like to assume the chair? Thank you.
Before you start, Mr. Dunkley, take your seat. Normally, this time of the year, some colors are inappropriate for this chambers. And what I would ask those that are in inappropriate colors, after lunch, please change the attire. Mr. Dunkley?
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, Deputy Speaker, what will be the sanction if we don't?
You don't want to hear that.
I'll still be back with this beautiful Somerset tie on. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question to the Honourable Minister, which we've carried over for 2 weeks, will the Honourable Minister please advise this Honourable House if he can provide an update on the agreed budget for the Redemption Farm as highlighted in the Minister's ministerial statement to the House on November 23rd, 2018.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, the young men that are working with Redemption Farm, they're actually in the gallery today, Mr. Speaker, to your right. They have just finished their first week of the program. I have had the ability and the opportunity to be at the farm. They have planted a number of crop in the ground over the last week. They have had the opportunity to meet with a number of agencies, have the opportunity to speak with a number of people in our community. They're working a daily plan. A portion of the program will be spent in the field. Another portion of the program will be spent in the classroom, meeting with community leaders, helping them with marketing, helping them with development. We believe that this is an excellent start to the program. I shared last week a comprehensive update in the House with reference to Redemption Farm. I know that the member from Ministry, from Constituency 10, visited the farm on more than one occasion. He actually took a refreshment to the young man at the farm. I was informed he was up there again this week, so clearly he has a close affinity to the project. I want to thank him for his support of the young man in the gallery, Mr. Speaker. The budget is just a little over, the budget for the entire program is just over $600,000, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any supplementary, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, this side of the House will support anything that's worthwhile, and certainly this program has the fundamental to be like that, and that's our interest in it. The supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, how much has been spent to date, and what budget head is it being used from?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have to get the budget head. We started last week. So understanding the farm, Mr. Speaker, when we go to the farm, we have had a number of people that have been gifting their services. A number of people, for instance, if you have someone to come in and they're talking about marketing, they're actually not charging us for marketing. But the program is going to go into a phase that we're going to be selling the vegetables, the fruit, and that's going to be a part of putting money into the program. The gentlemen are in their education phases. They will get a salary from the program. Right now, we are limited with the spend that we have. We're in the early stages of the program where we have not had a considerable outlay. Today, this week, the water was turned on by Works and Engineering. A lot of the seeds for the program were donated by brother and sister ministries. So whilst we cannot declare the money that we have spent today, it actually has been minimal based on the outlay at this stage has been exceedingly low because we're using brothers and sister ministries and donations from the general public.
Mr. Duncan, having another
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Assuming this is a one-year budget.
Would you do another supplementary?
Supplementary,
Okay.
yes, yeah. Assuming this is a one-year budget, is it government's vision to continue this program on longer for the current year?
Mr. Speaker, I'm so grateful for the questions. We've seen already the week, if you see the man, I had the opportunity to spend some time with them prior to coming to the House this morning. These are some of the brightest young men that our country has to offer. We were sharing this morning. I believe that when this program is in its genesis, this is the trial phase. And one of the young men that were in the program, he shared with them how a magistrate actually changed and saved his life. We're working on some beautiful things, getting the young men integrated, letting them maximize the opportunities. Of course, not only do we want to see the 8 young men we have in this program, men already reaching out to Pastor Bean to see how can we extend it right now. And so what we're trying to do is measure, make sure that we have the proper people in place. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, the purpose of Redemption Farms, can I tell you a secret, is actually not about vegetables. It's not about vegetables. It's about changing lives. It's about letting these young men be in this building today to look across both sides of the floor and see Bermudians that are passionate about their country, Bermudians that are passionate about service. Yes, this has budgetary constraints, and we will stay within the budget. This is not something that we believe is for 1 year, 2 years. We would like to see Redemption Farm become a farm on its own and to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. Clinicians have reached out to me, how can they support it? I've had members in our community, how can I volunteer to be a part? Talking to one of the gentlemen this morning, he was questioning how legitimate is the enterprise? Are we just doing it for press? Are we just doing it for highlights? Well, we will show them through spending time with them, by working with them, that this is a plan and a program to change not only their lives, but all the members of our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I see you got two of my pastors. That's Pastors Thomas Smith and Pastor Bean.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. We have Reverend Thomas Smith and Reverend Bean. They are 2 of the leaders of the program. Mr. Smith is actually a teacher, and over the summer, he brings a level of understanding to be able to work. Mr. Darren Woods is another man that's working for our program. He currently has 2 of our young men in Malawi, in Africa. And so you can see, Mr. Speaker, we spend a lot of time in this House criticizing what this government's doing. We thump our feet, and sometimes the questions that are supposed to be gotcha questions allow us to highlight the strength. And the young men are in this room this morning to show and bear witness, to bear evidence that this program is in the process of changing lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let me say that Reverend Thomas Smith is the grandson of Bishop Chauncey Smith, one of my relatives. Honorable Dumpty, you have a second question?
Second question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Honourable Minister please provide this Honourable House the details of the number of candidates who have been accepted into the Redemption Farm program, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, right now there are 8 young men in the program who all sit before you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary, Mr. Dunkley?
Yes, Deputy Speaker. How long does the program run for?
12 weeks, Mr. Speaker.
Second supplementary?
How many tranches of the program will there be? How many 12-week tranches?
So, Mr. Speaker, that's actually a very good program. This is an organic program. So what we're doing is we're allowing, yesterday, 2 people that wanted to join this cohort. Well, we believe that there are enough young men and young women in our country that need opportunities. We're doing 10-week programs, 12-week programs, and as the need arises, we believe that people will be recommended from different government agencies, from family members, from community members that say, you know what, I want the young men in my community to be given opportunities. These young men, Mr. Speaker, and I stand to be corrected, they will pick up a paycheck. Not only are they learning today, not only are they learning how to farm, today for all the work sitting in, they will pick up a paycheck today. That's a part of the $600,000. It allows them to work. It allows them to receive payment. It allows them to put together learning marketing, learning farming, learning husbandry, learning about mental health challenges, learning to talk to people, learning to talk to key members in our society. We believe that this is money well spent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Your third question, Mr. Dunkley?
I must have missed the answer in that explanation. So how many 12-week tranches will there be, Mr. Speaker?
I knew he wouldn't understand it, Mr. Speaker, because this is about changing lives. Mr. Speaker,
answer the question.
This, I knew he wouldn't get it because this is his I gotcha moment. He was expecting to catch some. He didn't expect to see 8 young men with their lives being changed. That's what he didn't expect. But I'm going to answer his question. He was expecting his typical tomfoolery in this house, Mr. Speaker. He wasn't expecting.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order?
Is impugning improper motives. This is a question period. This is where we ask the questions. They get answered, Mr. Speaker. Play straight up. This is not gotcha.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I just explained. This is a live, breathing organism. We have a cohort of 8 men. We believe there is sufficient need in this country for us to continue to expand on the changing the lives of the young men. We have 2 young men that have given indication. We believe as the program, we're in the first week, Mr. Speaker, that we believe that as the program grows, we will have enough people in our country that we can evolve through this program. And next year, we'll be asking for a budget to make it a longer program. This is a pilot, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dunkley, your third question?
Supplementary, Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Atherton?
Because the minister indicated that there were some 12-week tranches, why is it not possible to have the response as to how many 12-week tranches are being anticipated? And don't you need to say, oh, God? That's not that's a legitimate question.
Take a seat.
I actually don't know how to break this down into any other. Mr. Speaker, this program is in its genesis. People get referred to the program. We now have 8 young men that are in the program. We believe as the program goes to the public, as people start seeing the need, they will recommend more people to the program. Right now, the program is in its genesis. We have prepared this for a year.
Hang on one second. I think what they're probably asking, will these young men be in the program 20 weeks or 24 weeks?
Mr. Speaker,
or could they be?
Mr. Speaker, we are evolved. It's a 12-week program. At the end of the program, the leaders of the program will do analysis. They will look at the trajectory of their lives. If they need some further treatment, they might be referred. We have companies that are willing to...
So it can be extended?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
But my point is, we're still in the genesis development. This is a pilot program, Mr. Speaker.
All right. Your third, Ms. Atherton?
Supplementary. I understand that the minister's trying to give help to these individuals. Once they have,
What's the question?
what type of help will be given to these cohorts to have them find employment?
Mr. Speaker, last week in the minister's statement, I don't know if the memo is here, I took great painstaking to set out precept upon precept the purpose of the plan, how we will develop them, and what the long-term goals are. Mr. Speaker, and I will take time to do it. This is a holistic plan to take young men, to give them the opportunity to develop themselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. It gives them the opportunity to learn a trade, a skill, learn different aspects. At the end of it, we will look at it to see if there are other opportunities for them. If it is, they might be able to continue. There's also opportunities for other young people in our community to join that cohort. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dunkley, your third question.
Will the Honourable Minister please provide this Honourable House on an update on the state of the redemption farm and whether it's fit for purpose, that is, fields have been cleared and seedlings planted? Mr. Speaker, this question was asked 3 weeks ago and there was no action up there, so there's been some movement since that time, Mr. Speaker.
So, Mr. Speaker, again, and this is why Mr. Speaker, and this is why you have to highlight the mischievous nature of the question and answer. He said, hold on, Mr. Speaker, he said that there was no movement at the farm. How would he know that? Is he a farmer? Did he see the seeds planted? Did he see the fields plowed? That's all. You know it's mischievous. There seemed to be no work at the farm. How would he know that?
The fields were overgrown.
How did he know which fields we were using? Why is he visiting the farm 3 times a week? Why is he visiting the farm 3 times a week? Today he has to look at the young men in this room and you do his nonsense right in front of them. Mr. Speaker, he has to justify his foolishness. Mr. Speaker, the ground has been...
One second. Now, Mr. Dunkley, you don't talk to me like that. Let's get that straight. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, the ground has been planted. The seedlings are ready. The young men are tilling the ground every week. They have the opportunity to talk to agriculture experts. We believe that for an ongoing while that we've been tilling the ground, getting it ready, putting in the nutrients, making sure that everything is working. We're still working on the water. That should have been turned on in the last couple of days. The farm is ready and fit for purpose, Mr.
Dunkley, you have a supplementary, Mr. Dunkley? That's the end of question period. The other questions are written responses. Next is congratulatory and obituary speeches.
Mr. Speaker? Deputy Speaker?
The chair recognizes the leader of the opposition, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, I haven't received those answers.
Statement. Just a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
No, Mr. Cannoneer.
Yeah, no problem. Members, that brought us to the end of the written statements, but we still have time left for written questions, rather. But we still have time left for questions on statements that were presented this morning. So the deputy was all right. He was all right. He's just closing you out on the written questions. That's all. But for the statements this morning, the first question would be to the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think Mr. Cannoneer had a point.
I have a question.
A question on the written.
Yes.
Yeah. You had a supplementary.
No. I haven't received the answers, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, okay. Question. Sorry, let me just clarify for those listening. We had a written question also in the name of the opposition leader to the Premier, and it didn't require oral response, but it did require a written response. And Premier, those answers available?
Mr. Speaker, those answers are not available. I do believe there was communication between my office via the Cabinet Secretary and the Speaker's office for clarity on the questions and a point of order that was raised, and we're awaiting that response prior to the answering of the questions.
Okay, let me put it this way. We'll look into that as quickly as possible, and we'll have the answers, the response sorted out and the answer forwarded in their clarity. We'll have a discussion during this break just to get clarity on that. Opposition Leader, are you comfortable with that? Okay. All right. Now take us on to the questions this morning in reference to statements that were written. And Premier, you have members who wish to ask questions in regard to your statement and on the petty management. The first is from the opposition leader. Honourable member, would you like to put your question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're right ahead.
Our Premier mentioned that there was a frequency of petty requests, and I guess what I was trying to understand is the issue a frequency of the number of petty requests, or was it that the magnitude of getting to the results and the answers to these? Because the example that he gives is with the health ministry. It's one example, but it's an example of an mammoth amount of information. Is that the norm, or is it just a combination? I don't know.
Thank you. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Premier would know, members of the Cabinet are not intimately involved in the responses to petty requests. So from that, I'm not going to necessarily try to commit myself to a particular answer. What I can say in the broad aspect, whether it's examples in the Ministry of Health, whether it's the fact of examples in other ministries where there is work of government and budgets of government, there have been departments who have hired temporary additional staff just to deal with petty requests and the sheer volume and or breadth of them. What we are looking to do is examine how we can deal with these better administratively so that the work of government can continue and to ensure that the legitimate work in fulfilling the government's agenda, which is to deliver for the people of Bermuda, is not sidetracked by the volume and breadth of some of the questions of which are asked.
Thank you. Supplementary and new question.
Supplemental, yeah.
Yes.
He also mentioned, in the statement it says 341, this is petty request 341. I guess if you, since 2014, you works out to be about 75 requests per year. And considering that the Premier also mentioned that this, some of these objectives of weaponizing were to political ends, can he tell us whether or not he believes that there's been an increase of petty requests since becoming government with an average of about 75, if we take that number into consideration?
Thank you. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the answer, which the honourable member knows, is in the public domain and would be in the report of the Information Commissioner.
Thank you. Supplementary or? Okay. Premier, you also have an additional member who would like to put a question to you, and that's the member of constituency 19. Honourable member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Premier. On page 2, you make reference to the amount of information that was required to be furnished with respect to this petty request number 31. Can you indicate whether daycare centers are subject to review and licensing now?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I don't want to speak on a matter that is not underneath my remit. Standing orders would allow me to defer to the Minister of Health, but as you know, the Minister of Health is not here today. I'm happy to ask the Minister of Health to try to get an answer to the honourable member.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary, because if the minister is going to be asked the question, my other question relates to the fact that isn't this the type of information that the ministry would want the public, would want to track to be used when daycare centers are licensed?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak to the content of what was released nor the requests. What I can speak to you is what was in my statement, an example of issues where there is an incredible volume of work, where you're talking about policy analysts who are trying to deliver on important initiatives that are being sidetracked in order to deal with volumes of extensive requests, in addition to the fact of budget resources, which when you're talking about the Ministry of Health, can be used for a lot of other measures which are being dedicated to these particular items. We are going to review what is taking place to ensure that we can, as was in my statement, meet the original goal and intent of the Act, to ensure that we provide information, but to make sure that it does not cause civil servants to not give full and impartial advice, which will allow the best decision-making in public office and also not sidetrack legitimate work of the government.
Thank you. Second supplementary, right?
No, second question.
Second question, okay.
On page 4, the the Premier is indicating that he had some concerns about the trend in terms of the use of information, and he expressed some concerns about giving the public the right to obtain access to information. And I guess my question to the Premier is that performance indicators have usually been used so that the public gets an appreciation of what a particular ministry is doing. Would the Premier not consider that perhaps the performance indicators, if they were increased, that would allow the public to get more information about what was happening, and therefore they wouldn't need to have as many petty requests?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, the question itself calls for conjecture. I'm just trying to answer statements of a factual basis.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary. As it relates to the statement that the Premier made with respect to persons engaging in asking questions which seem to have some sort of hidden motive, on what basis would the Premier decide that this wasn't a useful question that the public wants to know in terms of what the departments are actually doing?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to provide factual information in response to the question on the statement, which is on Patty. She's asking a question about performance measures and other things, which I'm not prepared at this point in time to get into that level of conjecture. That's her opinion. I have the opinion as stated in my statement.
Thank you. Further? No? Okay. Premier, you have two other members who wish to put questions on this statement. Next is the opposition whip. Honourable member, would you still like to put your question?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I could be a redundant question, but I'm just wondering whether or what's being done to open data to the public. Just to have some of this data just open and readily available for the public to access.
Mr. Speaker, though that answer is not directly related to my statement, as the Minister has responsibility for information technology for the government, I'm happy to share with the Honourable Member that the E-Commerce Advisory Board, underneath my direction, is pursuing an open data initiative where we're looking at exposing multitudes of government data to the public, which is something that is not currently being done now. And I can undertake to the Minister to the Honourable Member to make a statement on that either in September or in November when there's more information available.
Supplementary? No. Premier, the next member who has a question for you is a member from constituency 22. Member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Premier, good morning. I like the color of your tie. There's a saying that says, never let it be said that the business of the public is none of the public's business. You, in respect of Patty requires the government to share with the public documents that the public is legally entitled to see. If the public is legally entitled to see these documents, how is that gotcha journalism or wanton political use of Patty, as you say in your statement?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, as we will note, that there have been documents which have been released from public officers which were not supposed to be released as per the law. The fact is, as I had indicated in my statement, the Patty regime is there for the provision of information, but in cases as a government, you must admit when things are not working in the best interest of the country. No one wants information to be disclosed, which is not supposed to be disclosed legally under law. That is what we are speaking about, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Premier, the example you just gave is an example of a mistake being made by a member of government or civil service. My question was, how are documents that the public is legally entitled to see gotcha journalism, to use your word, or, quote, wanton political use of Patty, to use your words?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell you is that when, for instance, Patty requests are used up here in political debates, as opposed to regular questions, it would seem that they were being used for political purposes.
Supplementary. Does the Premier not think it is a good idea that documents that should be legally available to the public should also be available to members of Parliament so that we may debate them?
Mr. Speaker, he asked the question earlier about my opinion on what I said about wanton political abuse, and I answered the question precisely.
Supplementary?
Supplementary. Does the Premier not feel that the public is interested in information about complaints about daycare centers, and that's information that the public should ask for?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I'm at pains to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Any supplementary? Do you have a second question? That brings us to a close of questions on that particular statement. Premier, you also have members who would like to ask questions on your second statement in reference to post-Brexit. The first is the member from constituency 8. Would you like to put your question, member?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Premier, you indicated that HM Treasury has confirmed that Bermuda's EU solvency equivalence will automatically be maintained between Britain and the UK. Will this, I'm saying what is written here, the UK. Will the EU also automatically maintain the solvency upon exiting Brexit?
Mr. Speaker, there is no change in the relationship between the Bermuda and the European Union regarding Solvency II.
Thank you.
Thank you. No supplementary?
No, she said the EU.
Okay. The Premier, the next question for you on this particular statement is from the opposition whip. Honourable member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just curious whether the committee that's going to be created will get paid.
Premier?
May I ask the honourable member to repeat her question?
She wants to know that the committee that's being formed for the post-Brexit, will they be paid?
Not a consideration at this time, Mr. Speaker, but depending on the volume of work, they may be.
Supplementary? No. Second question? Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just curious. The UK and Brussels offices, which have Kimberly Durant in the UK and Renee Webb, I believe, in Brussels, what involvement will those offices have with this working group and the post-Brexit working group?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I do believe that the statement refers to the work of the London office and making sure that the Brexit matters are managed from that perspective, and I'm certain that the EU's representative would be involved as well. But this is primarily a UK matter. The only provision on this issue with the EU is regards to Solvency II, a matter which was brought to us by industry and a matter of which the Minister of Finance and myself, upon our last visit to the United Kingdom, were able to resolve.
Thank you. No further? Premier, the same statement. The member from constituency 22 would like to put a question to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has said in his statement today how this is all new territory with Britain leaving the EU. Is the Premier supportive of Britain leaving the EU?
Premier?
I have no opinion on what the people in the United Kingdom wish to decide for themselves, just like I wish that the United Kingdom House of Commons will stay out of our business.
Supplementary or second question?
Supplementary. Obviously, the issue does have an impact on Bermudians as well. And as you pointed out in your statement, the decision to leave will impact upon us. So presumably you do have an opinion if it impacts upon Bermudians.
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I refer the honourable member for constituency 22 to the answer I gave moments ago.
Supplementaries? No No supplementary? Okay. New question? Third question?
Second question.
Second question.
Thank you. Will there be a requirement for this committee to attend and meet with any committees in the UK as part of this process?
Premier?
Not a vision at this time, Mr. Speaker. I would only imagine that that work can be considered from London, in a London office, but if there is a need, then that travel will occur. We do not know what position Brexit may happen. We are talking about uncharted territory. There could be a general election. There could be another referendum. There could be a collapse of the government. There could be an election where there is actually no majority. There could be a Scottish independence referendum and the United Kingdom breaking up. There could be lots of different things, Mr. Speaker. We do not know what the future holds. But what is prudent for the government is to, as we have in this particular instance, involve us, involve the opposition, involve the business community, and the third sector to ensure that the entire country is considering the matters which may come down the pipe. We don't know what will happen, but it's better for us to examine the consequences of the various options so that we can have a position on a way to move forward as a country. And as the Honorable Opposition Leader stated when he was asked by the media regarding what he would hope for from the new Prime Minister, and he says that he would hope that they would stay out of our affairs, it is the exact same thing which I would hope, that they would stay out of our affairs. But if the government changes, they may choose not to, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Done. Okay, Premier, that brings us to a close of questions for you this morning. We will now move on. The next set of questions this morning are for the Minister of Finance in reference to your second statement on the OECD. And that is from the Opposition Leader. And remember, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 2, the honourable member mentions some of the significant amendments that are under consideration, goes into holdings, finance, and leasing. Just curious, in our history with the OECD and what's happening also with the EU, I was a bit curious as to whether or not public register of beneficial ownership, the subject of it, has it come up with the OECD? We know that regimes are heading towards that way, and is that something that they also will be looking at?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the issue of beneficial ownership is a constant in these discussions. We have made commitments that are long dated, and we intend to remain committed to those commitments. I think, if memory serves me correctly, and I don't have the language in front of me at the moment, but we have committed to having a register when everybody else has one, or making our register available when there's a global standard.
Supplementary?
Yeah, supplementary, maybe a bit more direct. So I guess I'm trying to assess. I'm not sure if I got the answer. Is it a operative conversation? Is it a conversation right now being had with the OECD concerning this matter, or is it something that you're looking later on to address because it's not a priority? Has the OECD, has the OECD made it a priority, this particular issue?
Minister?
The issue of beneficial ownership is one that is, in my short 9 months of experience, has been a constant. There has been continued pressure on overseas territories and crown dependencies around the issue of beneficial ownership. We remain steadfast in our view because we have a register, and we have a register that I think is more robust than anybody else's. And so our view is that when there's a standard around disclosing of registers and a standard around what should be contained in those registers, then we will make ours accessible like everybody else should.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary. Yeah,
Second supplementary?
Yes, we know that the EU has set a date deadline. Has the OECD set a date deadline concerning this matter?
And sir?
I believe there is talk around around 2022, I think. I would need to come back to you to confirm that.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Supplementary.
Yes.
Would the minister agree with me that, in fact, Bermuda's had a register since the 1940s that's available and accessible by foreign tax bodies and, indeed, by any court requests in a normal and proper manner?
Minister?
I would wholeheartedly agree with the member, and I suspect that he would agree with me that when I say that no good deed goes unpunished.
No further questions for the minister. We'll now move on to the next minister. Minister Fogo. Whip, can you find your minister, please? Minister Keynes. Minister Keynes, we have a question regarding your first statement from the honourable member from constituency 10. Member, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the bottom of the second last page, the Honourable Minister says that there's indication that levels of offending is decreasing as evidenced by reduced road traffic casualties reported to KMEH, as he refers to roadside sobriety, which we fully support. But in light of the recently reduced statistics from KMEH, which shows that cases referred to both the Lamfogo and the emergency department have increased from 129 in April to 165 in May to 200 in June, what evidence does the minister refer to in his assumption of a reduced road traffic casualties?
Okay. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the information that we received from the Bermuda Police Service in conjunction with the Bermuda Hospitals Board is that the numbers are decreased when they're compared with where they are year on year with reference to accidents that involve driving whilst impaired or driving with the amount of alcohol in the blood. There is an overall sense of crime, road traffic accidents. We're talking specifically there's been a decrease in accidents as is related to traffic accidents that are related to matters that have to deal with drunk driving or driving whilst impaired.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I just would appreciate the Honourable Minister, when he has time, maybe we can have a conversation to show me that evidence, because it says decreasing as evidenced by reduced road traffic casualties. It doesn't refer just to sobriety. The figures of the hospital show different. Supplementary, second question, Mr. Speaker. In the same page, going up a paragraph, the Honourable Minister talks about joint maritime presence between the RBR and the Coast Guard element with the Bermuda Police Service. Could the Honourable Minister please inform this Honourable House which budget heads these joint services are coming from out, and has the budget been agreed?
Minister?
As the former Minister of National Security would know, that the Royal Bermuda Regiment has a marine element. The Royal Bermuda Police Service, the Bermuda Police Service has a police service. This joint service simply is them using the Marine section of the Bermuda Regiment and the Marine section of the Bermuda Police Service in joint operations. It doesn't necessarily mean they're sharing budgets, they're sharing vehicles, but what it's simply saying, Mr. Speaker, that when they're planning the operation or when they're planning to be out on the water, operationally, they are working together.
Thank you. Supplementary? Okay. The next question, we'll go back to the Minister Fergus. Good to see you in your seat. You have a question from the member from constituency 8. Honourable member, would you like to put your question to the Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister indicated in her statement that $50,000 is budgeted each year to assist individuals obtaining their GED diploma at care and adult education. Mr. Speaker, does this payment include a contribution to the schools, and is it in addition to the payments that the schools recover from the government for fees that are due for students attending the adult education center and care?
Minister?
Thank you for the question. What you've seen highlighted in the paper is the amount of money that has been set aside for specific students to cover the student tuition. That's what that money is.
Thank you. Supplementary?
So there are other student invoices beyond this amount, are we saying?
Minister?
Yes, I can say that we find ourselves sometimes with other persons who come to the Department of Workforce Development looking for assistance for GED programs. And so where we are able to provide that assistance, we do in the form of training or, I guess, if you will, as an award or as a I don't want to call it a scholarship amount, but as an award or a grant to cover their school fees if we feel that that person is a good candidate to cover, so that they are able to get the skill set they need in order to continue, whether that be in the workforce or...
You're fine? No further questions? That brings us to the end of the question period. Deputy, would you like to acknowledge what time of day it is? Lunchtime.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adjourn for lunch until
2 p.m. Thank you. Any objections to that? No objections? We stand adjourned until 2 p.m.